Lion.
I'm doing well, thank you.
Thank you so much for coming on the show. Really look forward to this conversation. I've been doing some research into your background and you have some really intriguing information to share. So I'm really excited to be sharing that with the listeners today. But before we get into that, I would love you to share with the listeners your backstory as to how you have arrived at what you're doing today.
Well, thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to share my story. It's one that I wasn't very comfortable sharing for many years, and so I am appreciating the opportunity to be vulnerable and share here. But my background, um, I grew up really with 8 out of 10 adverse childhood experiences, and that shaped a lot of the ways that I saw the world. And then I got married and had children and went back to school and ended up working in the operating room as a surgical technologist, which is someone who assists the surgeon in the surgeries. So there I observed. I've always been a helper, and I always wanted to help people, and I was fascinated with the human body. And so surgery was a really good fit for me to get to understand how the body works and to help. But in my years of working in the operating room and then teaching surgical technology and getting students prepared, I really learned a lot of things about human behavior and emotions and how people show up at work. And I learned that we didn't have a lot of the soft skills. We had a lot of the technical skills for the workplace. And you could teach people how to do the job itself, but a lot of these soft skills, or what I like to call the hard skills, were harder than and it didn't really matter what level of education people had. Surgeons have a high level of education, but that doesn't mean that they came in with all the social skills or the emotional intelligence skills or some of the skills that would help them operate in a more effective manner. And so I started to dive into human behavior and study emotional intelligence. And as I was getting my master's in human resource development, which is the people side of HR. It's not the compliance or the law. It's more about what makes people tick and what makes them really engaged and motivated and why do they behave the way that they do. I found so much interest in it, and I realized that I had some kind of a superpower as it relates to being raised in trauma. I pick up on subtle cues and I'm very sensitive to people's emotions and whatnot. And so I started to use that power. And now I get to speak and consult and coach and facilitate in the area of really what we believe in our company, Black River Performance Management, is that work should fuel the human spirit and not drain it. And so we help organizations and teams and people lead more effectively through their people.
And I love your title, the Chief Soul Officer. So tell us a little bit about the Chief Soul Officer.
Well, one thing about being an entrepreneur is you get to be called what you want. And I came across it through somebody that I had been mentored a little bit through just, how you take some mentoring online, but I had read her book. Her name is Shelley Paxton, and I read her book called Soul Batical, not sabbatical. And she calls herself a chief soul officer, and I love that title. And I really feel like this phase of life, that's what I'm stepping into, is my soul rather than my ego. My ego served me for a long time to get where I am today, but it's something that I'm chipping away slowly and really discovering who I am now in this phase of life, in this second half of life.
And it's so true. Like we spend that first part of life finding ourselves, and it's
Hmm.
a journey we all go on. Some people find it a little earlier than others, and some are late bloomers. And
Yeah.
so yeah, but it's something that yeah, it's I think a beautiful phase, really. And we go through struggles and uh, yeah, certainly have our challenges and ups and downs, but it's a nice sort of journey to go on, and it's really like and it relates back to what you shared earlier in relation to the hard and soft skills is that we go through school learning, as you said, these hard schools skills, but it's through our life experiences we start to better connect with and understand the softer skills and the
Mhm.
importance of them. And I was thinking, like, as you're sharing that, why have we sort of evolved the education system to really focus on the hard skills? And it must come from that industrial revolution in terms
Mhm.
of us moving to more efficiencies and productivity and being more transactional in nature. Like, because we evolved as relational beings, in nature, and that's what we knew. But this modern era industrial revolution has really brought this focus on productivity and more transactional, and that's what the hard skills is. It's just
Mhm.
transactional, so. But as you've probably realized in this, that in order to be really good at the transactional stuff, we need the relational mastery there as well.
Yeah, it's hard to get people to do what you want when you don't have a relationship. It's hard to collaborate or to get anything done when it's, us against them, or it's the whole white versus black thinking, just right and wrong. It's hard to really find common ground and get in the middle when we're transactional and we're just, walking around like robots, because we're not robots. And this is part of, I think, what's happened with um, the loneliness epidemic, and people just feeling disconnected, having more anxiety, productivity, and the external success script that society has given us is really kind of made us follow along. And most of us really just kind of were going with the flow with everybody else around us. And then one day you wake up and go, I don't like this anymore, or this is not really who I am or who I want to be. And so it's that realization of that you've been caught in the rat race, and now you're like reevaluating your life on I think COVID was a good check for all of us too, to see what's really important, what's meaningful. But then it was easy to step right back into it again too, if you weren't being intentional. And so, um, yeah, I think that it's something that we have to be mindful of, that we are humans, and the more we improve our human skills, the better off we're going to have. It's going to be with our relationships and our work lives, and just overall life satisfaction and meaning making. Meaning is, that's what our life is about, making meaning. It
So
fuels
sure.
us. Yeah.
Abs- Absolutely. And if you look at, as you said, you've become very intrigued about why humans do what they do. And it is in the search of meaning, what's my purpose here? Why am I here? And what am I to contribute? And, yeah, so yeah. So what have you learned along this pathway of, learning more about humans and, why they do what they do?
Yeah, I've learned a lot about motivation and what motivates people, what demotivates people, how our emotions impact us and actually impact our decision making, and also just how different each of us are from a perspective and from a behavioral standpoint. Like, some of us want a lot of data, some of us are really peoply, so just understanding, using some science and some tools to kind of um, reg- understand actual human behavior and see how we're the same, how we're different. And a lot of us, I mean, we're the same in a lot of ways. We just have some different styles and different lenses. And of course, our experiences shape how we see the world too. And so understanding all of those things, I think, has helped me to have a better understanding of gaining perspective when I'm talking to somebody, instead of thinking that everybody should see things my way. Even though everybody wants everybody to see things their way, I really start to see how someone could see it from a different perspective. Especially, if I was raised in the petri dish that they were raised in, I'd probably be doing the same thing. One of my favorite books is, well, I love two books that are about Holocaust survivors. One is Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning, and the other one is Edith Edgar is The Choice, a choice. And they both talk about, we're searching for meaning, and we always have a choice no matter what is going on. And I think if somebody can be in a concentration camp and see this kind of perspective, then we can too, regardless of what's going on around us in the world. Like for us right now, the political climate and what's happening in our country is a big challenge. And it's really trying to find, what am I in control of during this? What can I do to continue to do good things that bring meaning and purpose in my life? And how can I help people, other people that might be struggling right now, and create connection in a lonely, anxious, spun out world?
Yeah, certainly in the Australian climate, we're about to enter election in, I think, next week, next weekend, I think it is. Yeah, next weekend. Pretty sure it's next weekend, or it could
Yeah.
be this weekend, actually. But anyway, so we've been having that, campaign. Certainly not as big as the US campaign in lead up to your elections, but certainly we're going through some sort of transitional phase. And you mentioned, obviously, US have been through and they're going through, I guess, a big transition, which is obviously having world implications. So, this whole thing around transitions, and you mentioned before that control and all this, I'm really keen to explore that, because one of the things I came across when I was researching you is this transitional intelligence. And so I'm really keen to further explore transitional intelligence and how we can get better at that.
Okay. Sure, I'd love to share it because it's really kind of game changing for me. And it's not my term. I wish I had coined it, but I didn't. The term was actually coined by, and it's actually copyrighted by Modern Elder Academy, which the founder is Chip Conley. He's actually been on my podcast before. My husband and I actually stumbled across MEA in Baja, and have done retreats there and done some online and some face to face, and are actually um, leaders of the Pacific Northwest chapter. So I learned through this. And so then I decided to get certified in transitional intelligence, which is the ability basically to navigate and move through life with skill and resilience. It's skill building, just like emotional intelligence skills are skills that can be built. Um, I didn't know that there was a toolbox for navigating transitions. And I wish I had a lot earlier in life. I wish I had the emotional intelligence skills earlier in life. And I wish I had the transitional intelligence skills earlier in life, which is why I'm doing the work that I'm doing now for people that want to have some actual tools for that versus just trying to wing it, or do what most of us have done, is do what was modeled to us that maybe wasn't so skillful.
Yeah, yeah, very true.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so serendipitously we came across this, and so I've been continuously learning, taking more courses, becoming certified in transitional intelligence as well, because not only for myself but for my clients and for the organizations that we serve, it's important to understand people's phases of life and the transitions that they're going through, and how those psychologically impact their performance and how they feel and how they show up, and how work we spend more time at work than we do with our loved ones. And so, how do we make meaning? How do we feel about where we work and what we do? And I noticed that transitional intelligence goes with EQ a lot, emotional intelligence, because there are a lot of messy emotions that come along with these transitions. And so it dovetails nicely with what I was already studying. But it also gives me a language and a tool set and a skill set and a mindset that helps me to navigate my own, as well as help others see things from a give more clarity to the fears and to the threats that they may be facing.
Yeah. So, what are some of the tools that come along with transitional intelligence? Like, what are the things that people should be working on in order to build transitional intelligence?
Well, for one, I would say working on some of the emotions that come around those. That is one thing that I like to identify right away. Like, first of all, navigating the transition. Where are you? Like, every transition comes with an ending to something, whether that's our health comes to an end and we suddenly have some diagnosis, or a relationship ends that we didn't expect to end, or we get fired, or um, something ends, or some of it could be not externally, it could be internal. we decide we want to move into a new role or we want to leave this relationship. So some things are external and some things or transitions are internal. So knowing where we are. So we start with the end in mind. We know that something that isn't the same as it used to be. For me right now, it's not just that I'm empty nesting, but I have adult children, and that's different than what I expected. And so I'm navigating that transition and trying to figure out how to not be too needy, and also how to like give them their life, but also I want connection, but I'm not sure how much to connect or how much not to. And I'm tiptoeing around that and having fun conversations with my kids too, to find out what they actually need in this time of their life. Um, everything changes, right? Everything changes and nothing stays the same. And so we know that change is coming. So why not get better at the skills? So I think, first of all, knowing that it's coming. And then there's the middle part, the messy middle, or that is kind of like the soup or the chrysalis for the butterfly, right? Like the soupy, icky, gooey middle where we're not the same as we were. And it's a lot of emotions. And the linear life is just not really existent. It's kind of a messy ball of yarn. And this is what Chip calls the midlife unraveling, right? Where in Chip, he's the founder of Modern Elder Academy. And so when he talks about um, that from Brene Brown. Her research calls it a midlife unraveling. And we all go through these things like losing parents, taking care of parents, empty nesting, maybe going through a divorce, losing friends, financial stress, all kinds of things that come up, or Bruce Feiler calls it life quakes that come up, right? Like when you have, that's when you have a bunch of transitions going on. And I went through my own set of life quakes from about 2008 to 15ish, where I actually had some serious life quakes. I lost my mom, I lost my dad, my hero, my aunt got Alzheimer's, and I was taking care of her. I was the power of attorney for both of them. I had repatriated from China back to the US from Shanghai. My marriage was in trouble and eventually ended up in divorce. So, like, that's a lot of life transitions in a 5 year period. And that stage of life, I was living in fight or flight. And I didn't know which way was up or down. And there was a lot of emotions and fear and uncertainty, and also of, single parenting and whatnot, and supporting myself. So all of a sudden, you could be on top of Maslow's hierarchy and then shoots and ladders your way down to the bottom.
It's
And
very true.
so,
Yeah,
yeah.
and I think you nailed it with it. Life isn't linear. It isn't. It's in a constant state of flux and change. And I
Mm-hmm.
think it's an illusion that we often hang on to, is that life is linear, or it needs that some constant that we get attached to, that we just want it to be that way. And the reality is that it's in constant change. And
Mm-hmm.
I think that's something that we need to embrace, is that, yeah, life's like, as you said, like when something's ending, but there's also new beginnings at the same time, like, right?
That's the
So
next one.
yeah.
That's the next one. And that's the one where there's hope and some optimism and a little fear too, but also hope and optimism that you could rewrite your story here. Like it can be a new chapter. And, even if your kids have left, what could you learn to do? Could you learn to play the piano? Could you learn a foreign language? What could you do with that time that you gain back? And so knowing where you are on the stage, knowing that the emotions that come with those phases, and then also, like you said, figuring out what's in your control and what's not in your control. I listened to your podcast recently on the illusion of control, and it resonated because oftentimes when we get in that fight or flight phase, we really try to grasp for control, to try to control other people and others, our circumstances, which is, it doesn't work, and it leaves people being frustrated and annoyed with us. And um, while it's a normal reaction, it's becoming more mindful of when we're in that phase, or getting the feedback like, chill out, mom, or you know I still love you, but I don't need you around all the time, right? Like, so those kinds of things where you're learning this new phase and learning to get your sea legs as it relates to being an empty nester or this new job or this new relationship. So those new beginnings also have their challenges. And so um, but they have so much opportunities. And I think one of the biggest things for me is it helps me to see change as an opportunity. And so that's a mindset shift. Instead of this is the worst thing, I hate it. Or I even think of retirement. Many people that I work with are so their identity is so wrapped in their work, they wouldn't know who they were if they didn't have their title or that position. And that's kind of what I feel like as a mom. Like, it's been such a part of me that I have to figure out, who am I without my kids, or without, like, even though I'm not without them, it's a way different vibe than it was having them around or talking to them daily, right?
What out of all your tools that you've acquired over the years and knowledge today, what's helping you best through this current phase that you're going through?
I would have to say awareness. I mean, gaining awareness, you can't do anything if you don't have awareness. And so I think that takes curiosity and also a willingness. It takes bravery to, like, face yourself and see what part of it's yours and what you're blaming on other people. And so it's easy to blame other people, and it's not easy to take ownership, and it's not easy to come from a place of compassion. It's just easier to blame. And that's so working through that, going from the place of blame to taking more ownership on ourself and how we're showing up. um, I would say that the most of the people that I work with, when we really dive in deep, a lot of the things that are going on in their mind aren't actually happening. A lot of it's internal self sabotage and beliefs that aren't even serving them anymore, and they don't even know where they got those beliefs. And I relate with that because I went through that, but I've been shedding some of that old skin, right? Just like every animal in nature does. There's parts of us that we need to shed too, and chip away parts of us that don't serve us any longer.
Yeah, and it's serving you in the point of uh, getting away from that attachment. Like, so it's, yeah, that as you mentioned, attachment to titles, attachment to positions. It's, really breaking you free. And
Hmm.
yeah, it's that next phase of, I guess, self discovery in a sense, that it's taking you into. You mentioned a good point, which was around, it's easy to blame others, but I'm thinking it is easier to blame others, but the ability to move on is much harder because you get stuck, right? Because when you blame someone else, you relinquish control. That they're controlling you essentially because
Hmm.
you got to be like it. And so you actually get stuck, and you actually don't form much of that soup. You just got to sort of get very stuck in that position, as opposed to, once, as you said, if you have awareness and you start to look inwards and start, I mean, that is harder, but it'll get you through it quicker, right?
Yeah, I in my book, my new book that's coming out, Emerge, charting new waters to your best self. It's coming out in September, and I liken life to a river because it's a journey, and there's class 5 rapids. There's, sometimes where your boat gets overturned. And everybody's on different parts of the journey, but I think about this part, moving through maybe like an eddy, an eddy that kind of spins you out.
Mm.
So blame, people can get caught up in that eddy and stay there their whole life, and they could actually become an offshoot, and actually could be like a reservoir where you are stuck and it starts to stink, and there's no vitality, there's no real um, life or livelihood. And so you get to stay there as long as you want, but the quicker you move through the blame portion, the better you're going to feel, the better your relationships are going to be. Once we start to take ownership, then there's some life that starts to breathe back into it. And then once we get into actually having compassion for why that person might have done what they did, And for me, I had to go through that because I had 8 out of 10 adverse childhood experiences, and that should have landed me in jail statistically. But really, what it landed me was a really hard shell and a lot of blaming and victimization and victimhood, which lasted far longer than it should have. Then, well, I don't even need to say it should have, but than I'd have liked it to. I think I know if I had had the tools of emotion, understanding my emotions, understanding transitions, understanding ACEs, adverse childhood experiences, all of those things. If you know better, we can do better. And so, if you're in that place where you're blaming other people, this is a real good time to check in with yourself and say, what do you want to do? Do you want this relationship? Do you need to be right, or do you want this relationship? Because the ego wants to be right, flat out. And the soul wants to be in relationship. We want to make things work. We want to find out how we can meet together. We want to figure out what we can do. We want to see things from other people's perspective, and we want to be more compassionate. We're compassionate beings. We're meant to be. And so I think it's just it's becoming aware of how your fears and your insecurities and your lack of looking at your own self and just blaming other people keeps you stuck into not growing into who you want to be.
And like the whole thing around right or wrong is really interesting too, because when you look at science, it's constantly evolving. Our understanding is constantly evolving, and we
Mm-hmm.
realize things that we believed or understood or what we thought was a truth in the past is now just disproved. And
Yeah.
so it's really interesting when we sort of get hung up on this this pride around I'm right, and but really are you like it's it's always questionable. And that's what I've always found with having studied nutrition, and now I'm relearning
Mm-hmm.
nutrition, and this is only like I think it's sort of 6 years on since I graduated, or 6 or 7 years. And but like I'm just thinking, imagine I just had a thought what I learned at university was right, then
Mm-hmm.
I'd be going forward and I guess preaching stuff that's out of date or not not so right.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
And that takes humility and willingness to be a lifelong learner. That's what I define myself as, a chronic learner. I mean, I would, if I could learn, if I could just go to school and get paid for it, that is what I would do for sure.
Yeah.
So, continuing to learn, continuing to question ourselves. And earlier on in my life, I would have had a hard time changing my mind. But now, if somebody has more information, more data, more things that can support a new idea, I'm totally willing to change my mind. Um, it also matters how people approach you, right? Like with love and kindness and some, then it's like, oh yeah, I can see where you're seeing it from that perspective. Just imposing things, that's not going to help either. So I love the idea of continuously learning and knowing that what you thought 3 years ago may not be the same. It may not be correct anymore.
And it's the same with like you mentioned in that relationship about being right, or what's more important, but the ego, or going to the soul and maintaining the
Mm-hmm.
relationship. And I'm just thinking that challenging moment where what it's really helping you with is getting a better understanding of them and where they're coming from, right? And so,
For sure.
but we can be blindsided in thinking that we think, no, I'm right, they're wrong, and we don't allow that deeper connection. Whereas this is really inviting a deeper connection, is thinking, how come they think this way, or why are they experiencing or feeling it this way? And if you require the open mind in order and the curiosity to explore that different perspective, as you
Yeah.
mentioned.
Yeah. In Edith Edgar's book, she talks about all of us have the capacity to have have an inner Hitler. Like,
Mm, mm,
if you were raised in his environment
mm,
and around and had all the same experiences, you might be that too.
mm,
I mean, really, every single person, and this is one from Ellen Langer. She says the behavior makes sense from the actor's perspective. Otherwise, they wouldn't be doing it.
100%.
And so for me, when I see odd behaviors or stuff that I'm not understanding, it's more of an opportunity to say, I wonder what's making them think that, right? I'm wondering how they got to this conclusion. You know, sometimes I get really frustrated, especially with like what's going on with the US right now. I struggle sometimes to wonder, how did they think that this is a good idea? Like, specifically MAGA. Okay. That is something I struggle to understand why that's going on, but it makes sense from their perspective.
Mm, mm. Totally. And
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. And like, I think some of it, well, certainly, what we're seeing from Australia's perspective is, the whole thing around tariffs, but the whole thing is, this waking people up to thinking, okay, we need to think differently. We're going to have to come to an arrangement, an agreement. And so it starts people thinking about their position and, what
Mm-hmm.
they want. And it's actually, as much as it feels hard, it's actually opening up conversations, and I think through that, better outcomes can actually be achieved when
Yeah.
you realize, like, this is the importance in terms of what the US produce, and we really need that. And and it's the same vice versa. And I think we can just look at it and feel uneasy about it and think, oh, huge price rises are going to come and it's going to, hurt my financial position and all this sort of stuff. But I think ultimately, as you can see, it's sort of a real flux, and it's had pauses and reignitions and things like that. And ultimately, it's going to come to a point where countries are, come to something that they're happy with.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
And us too, we're figuring it out here at home. Like, what I who knows, like, this is a big transition for all of us. It's stuff we've never faced. None of us have ever been here before. There's so much uncertainty, and so using the tools and understanding has helped me not lose my mind.
Mm,
And finding people to discuss things with, and even family members that have completely different views than me, really trying to understand them
mm,
and understand where they're coming from. And that, then when I actually listen, I actually see where it comes from
mm,
and everything else. And instead of being judgmental, just, which is hard to do because it's the easiest thing, it's easy to become judgmental. It
mhm,
just is. It takes actual extra work to think about, okay, what is actually going on here, and how could they see a different perspective if they were watching the same, if their algorithm is giving them the same information and the same news channels giving them the same information, how would they have a different perspective?
it's so very true. And you touched on before that Maslow hierarchy of needs, and that judgment's very much at the survival level, right? So
It
it,
is.
it, it really takes that, in order to transcend the hierarchy, we need to have that open mind, that curiosity, and lean into better understanding where they're coming from in order to
Mm-hmm.
grow the relationship together. Because I, see all relationships as this, you come together over commonality, right? You looking for, what we have in similar, but
Mm-hmm.
relationships grow through the differences. And so
Yeah.
it's then leaning into the differences to allow both of you to grow. And it looks, not both parties want to grow through the differences, and some parties will want to just move on. That's
Mm-hmm.
fine. But you know to relationships are really strengthened through the differences,
Yeah.
and because that's how we get to the understanding, the deeper understanding.
Yeah, my cousin and I stayed up one night just talking about, we're on different political sides, but we're not even on sides, because I'm not one or the other.
Yeah.
I'm not a Democrat or a Republican. I've always just been in the middle, and I vote for the least horrible person, usually. That's what I try to do. The person I think that sucks the least. And so that is where I stand. But like, literally, you know, having that conversation, like with my cousin and some other family members, I really can see that we actually agree on more than we disagree on. Um, and so I think that's one of the challenges that we face is this black and white thinking, or thinking that if you're on this side, you believe everybody believes this, or if you're on that side, or even just the whole US sucks. Like all that kind of thinking doesn't help anybody, because that's not true. All or none is not true.
And you and it really, I think you've summed it up well here. Is that with the elections, you have to take a side, right? But
Yeah.
as you said, I like a bit about this, I like a bit about this, but which is the going to have the least impact on my life, right? And so
Hmm.
then you're forced to make a decision, and I think that's part of the issue is when people say this is I'm a Republican or I'm a Democrat. As you said, then all the baggage comes along with that as well. It
Yeah.
says, yeah, yeah.
Really, truthfully, where we don't need the baggage, we just need to find out what, and maybe this is what we need to actually come together more as a nation. And I think there's people that are not liking what they're seeing. I know there's plenty of us that are not liking, and it doesn't, and even plenty of Republican friends that I have are not liking what they're seeing. They didn't think this was going to happen. And so um, but this is a huge transition for all of us. And everybody has the right to their feelings and their frustrations and how they're navigating those. And it's impacting all of us. It's impacting the world, and all of us that are in it. It feels like a big old storm out there. It's so one of the things that I've been doing too, and this could be helpful for your listeners, is disconnecting from the news, disconnecting from social media a little bit more, because it gets me super emotionally hijacked. And being informed by an email, I get an email a day that has all that everything's cited, and I don't read it every day, but at least it helps me stay informed without getting so much noise and allowing me so much consumption that's going to get me emotionally hijacked, that's going to make me just think gloom and doom all the time.
That's a great point. In order to grow, and this we mentioned the self-discovery piece is this disconnection. And
Yeah.
yeah, and as much as it's hard to do, because when you're in that fight or flight, you want to know, you're desperate for certainty, right? So you want to
Mm.
know, and this is what the media feed off, right? They know that
Yes.
you want to know, and you want to see the next headline from them, and then watch the ads that come afterwards,
That's
right?
human
So
behavior.
yeah, that's
They
human
know what brings you
behavior.
back. They know
Yeah.
what makes you buy.
Yeah.
They know what makes you vote. And to know that that they're doing everything human behavior research so that they get you to do what they want. And so it's really checking in with what you're consuming.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. That's such a great tip to finish on this thing of disconnecting in order to grow and help you through the transition. Like it can be like disconnecting from the source of frustration and connecting with self, and have that self discovery in order to grow through that transition. I really appreciate the insights that you've shared, Angie. How can the listeners and viewers best connect with you?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. I love that we said you have to disconnect to connect, because
Yeah.
and so disconnect from the things that you're struggling with, and connect with those personal relationships and start working on those instead of wasting energy on stuff you have no control over, right? And to people that want to connect with me, they can check out Black River Performance Management. .com, and I'm also on LinkedIn. And then my book will be coming out in September. So um, watch for that, and that would be pretty much the way people could connect.
Awesome, fantastic. I really appreciate you coming on, Angie, and really enlightening the listeners on this subject matter of transitional intelligence, which, as you said, ties in emotional intelligence. So it's been very enlightening. So I really appreciate your time.
Thank you, and I really appreciate you having me on the podcast, and I appreciate the vulnerability that I got to share. It's not easy with what we're going through right now, but I really do feel like we will get through this, and it's just nothing stays the same. This too shall pass. It's a storm.
It's a great quote to finish on. This too shall pass. So thank you so much, Angie. And to the listeners, please share it with others that you know that are struggling out there, that are in a transition, that could really benefit from Angie's wisdom. So please share this episode far and wide and get it out there, because this is all about helping others. Thank you.
Thank you. I didn't know I was going to have a little political piece